Hi, I'm Jeff and welcome to A Million Movies. Now, did you know that the holiday classic It's a Wonderful Life was actually based on a greeting card? Philip Van Doren Stern had the idea for the story. It actually came to him in a dream in 1938. And by 1943, he had completed the short story he was calling The Greatest Gift, and he was looking for a publisher. Unfortunately, he couldn't find a publishing house that was willing to print his short story. So he went out and paid for 200 pamphlet-style copies of the story to be printed. And then he sent them out to his friends and family as Christmas cards, making It's a Wonderful Life the first, we think the only Hollywood movie to ever be made based on a Christmas card. And that's just the first of 50 fun facts about It's a Wonderful Life that we're going to cover here today on A Million Movies. So let's get started. One of those 200 original copies of The Greatest Gift that Stern sent out to his friends and family ended up in the hands of a man named David Hempstead. Now, David Hempstead was a producer at RKO Pictures, and Hempstead read the story and thought this would make a great Hollywood movie. He reached out to Stern and bought the rights to the story for $10,000 and began putting together a package for the movie with Cary Grant in the lead role. Now, the project got delayed and Hempstead wasn't able to get back to it soon enough, but he got a call from Frank Capra, and Frank Capra was also interested in the story and offered to buy the rights from RKO Pictures. And RKO Pictures sold them to Frank Capra for the same $10,000 that they paid for them originally. Now, with Frank Capra controlling the rights, he began to look at the story, and he didn't think Cary Grant was the right fit for the lead actor for the story that Capra wanted to tell. So Capra sat down with the story again and began writing a new script, developing it with a different actor in mind. The actor was Jimmy Stewart. Now, Capra was not the only person to be involved with writing the script for It's a Wonderful Life. He brought in Matt Connelly, Dorothy Parker, Clifford Odets, and Dalton Trumbo, among others. Now, from everything we've heard, the experience of being a writer on It's a Wonderful Life was not a wonderful experience. Capra was known for a demanding pace and for frequent changes, and that threw some of the writers off. In fact, when the movie was finally released, two of the writers refused to even watch the film. In addition to the challenges with the script, they weren't even sure if Jimmy Stewart was going to be in the movie. It's a Wonderful Life would be Jimmy Stewart's first film after returning from World War II, and he was likely suffering from what we know today as PTSD. He wasn't sure he was up for it, he wasn't sure his acting was as good as it was before the war, and he just didn't know if It's a Wonderful Life was the right film to try and come back with. It was actually Lionel Barrymore, who played Mr. Potter in the movie, who convinced Jimmy Stewart to be in the film. In an interview, Jimmy explained what happened. Jimmy said, "I wasn't sure if doing movies and acting were important enough, coming out of the war and all. Maybe Barrymore sensed something. He really helped lift my spirits. I asked him if my acting was decent. Barrymore brought me to reality when he said, 'Is it more decent to drop a bomb on people or bring a ray of sunshine to them through your acting?' And he was right." Capra's favorite, Jean Arthur, was the original choice to play Mary, but Jean Arthur had a commitment to be on Broadway at the time and couldn't get free to be in the movie. Capra also looked at Ginger Rogers and Olivia de Havilland, among other actresses. They either weren't available or turned the role down. Ultimately, he decided on Donna Reed for the part. Now, this would be Donna Reed's first starring role, and she was just 25 years old. Donna Reed was originally from Denison, Iowa, and Lionel Barrymore, for one, wasn't convinced she was the country girl she presented herself as to the rest of the cast and crew. One day on the set, they had a cow, so Lionel Barrymore made a bet, said, "Bet Donna Reed $50 that you can't milk a cow." Donna Reed went right over and she milked the cow. Later said of the incident, "It was the easiest $50 I ever made." With the main cast ready to go, the only thing holding up production at this point was actually building the sets, building the town of Bedford Falls. They decided to build it at RKO's Encino Ranch, and they used about 4 acres of the ranch to build the town. They built about 75 buildings, storefronts, residential buildings. They built a factory area. They even built the slums. Main Street itself was 300 yards long, about 3 city blocks. Now, the sets were used for many years after It's a Wonderful Life, but unfortunately, if you wanted to see the town of Bedford Falls, so you can't do it anymore. They were all destroyed in 1954. Even though the sets were destroyed many years ago, there is one exterior location you can still go and see. And that is the Martini's house. The Martini's house is located in the La Cañada Flint Ridge area of Los Angeles, just north of Pasadena, just north of Glendale. Now, speaking of the Martinis, It's believed that the Martini family was based on Frank Capra's own family. Capra's family immigrated from Sicily to the United States in 1903, and Capra in Italian means goat. So when the Martinis arrive at their new home, you'll actually see a goat in the car with the Martini family. Now let's get into the movie itself, and we'll start with the opening credits. This film was produced by Liberty Films, which was set up by Frank Capra, George Stevens, and William Wyler. Now, the film company didn't last very long. It's a Wonderful Life and State of the Union were the only two films ever made by Liberty Films. Just for a little historic context, the telegram that Mr. Gower gets, alerting him that his son has died of influenza, is dated in 1919. Now, 1919 was the year that the Spanish flu pandemic spread across the battlefields of Europe. It ended up killing millions of people. There's a pretty startling scene at the beginning of It's a Wonderful Life when Mr. Gower, played by H.B. Warner, slaps young George Bailey, played by Robert Anderson. Now, Robert Anderson later on explained that during that scene, H.B. Warner was drunk and that those slaps were 100% real. In fact, the slaps drew blood from Robert Anderson's ear. The actress playing Jimmy Stewart's mother is a lady named Beulah Bondi, and she had great experience playing his mom. In fact, during her career, she appeared as Jimmy Stewart's mom 5 different times, including here in It's a Wonderful Life and in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. In the movie, Jimmy Stewart as George Bailey says he wants to go to college because he wants to learn how to build things. In real life, Jimmy Stewart went to Princeton, and his major was architecture. The actor that Jimmy Stewart cuts in on when he wants to dance with Donna Reed is an actor named Carl Switzer. Now, if Carl Switzer is familiar to you, you're probably a lot like me and you grew up watching a lot of television. Carl Switzer is best known for playing Alfalfa in the Little Rascals Our Gang films. The gym with the pool under the floor is real and it's still there. It's at Beverly Hills High School. The floor still opens, it still closes, there's still a pool underneath it, and it's still an amazing piece of engineering to watch. Despite many, many rumors, the characters Bert and Ernie on Sesame Street were not named for the police officer and the taxi driver in It's a Wonderful Life. The names were just a coincidence. The song that Mary and George sing together, Buffalo Gals, was actually an old vaudeville tune. They would take the name of the city, Buffalo in this case, and they could switch it out to whichever town they happened to be in that night. Now, it just so happens that the Buffalo version became the most popular, and so that's the version that we know to this day. When George and Mary are walking past the old Granville house, George explains that if she can break a piece of glass, she gets to make a wish. Now, on the set that day, they hired a marksman so they could shoot out the pane of glass when she threw her rock. But on the first take, Donna Reed threw a rock and actually hit the glass. Turns out that she played baseball when she was in high school and actually had a pretty good arm. Frank Capra liked to create as much realism on the set as he could. A good example of this is when George Bailey is on the phone with Sam Wainwright. To shoot that scene, he had Jimmy Stewart in one area of the soundstage on the phone set, on the house set, and he had Frank Albertson, who played Sam Wainwright, on another set across the soundstage. They could hear each other and have the conversation in real time, both being shot independently and then edited together. Jimmy Stewart was very nervous about the kissing scene he had with Donna Reed towards the beginning of It's a Wonderful Life. This was his first romantic scene since coming back from the war, but Frank Capra really wanted to capture that nervousness. He thought it would play well with the character of George Bailey. So he insisted that Jimmy Stewart and Donna Reed not rehearse this scene. So what you're seeing in the film is the unrehearsed first take of their performance. The bird in the office at the Bailey Brothers building alone was Jimmy the Raven, and Jimmy the Raven appeared in every Frank Capra movie after 1938. There's a great scene in It's a Wonderful Life when Uncle Billy and George Bailey are walking back to the Bailey house. Uncle Billy is walking on to his house, and as he goes off camera, a stagehand happened to knock over some gear and made a loud clang. Without missing a beat, Thomas Mitchell, who played Uncle Billy, said this. I'm alright! Oh, sweetie. That line was an ad-lib, but Frank Capra loved it so much, he not only kept it in the movie, he gave the stagehand who knocked the gear over $10 for what he called improving the sound quality. Uncle Billy is probably Thomas Mitchell's most well-known performance, but he has appeared with Jimmy Stewart in another Capra film years earlier. They both appeared together in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. In fact, Capra gave Thomas Mitchell his big break by giving him a featured role in his movie Lost Horizon. Prior to It's a Wonderful Life, snow was often made with cornflakes that had been painted white. Now that looks great, but it also makes a lot of noise when you walk on it. They wanted something that would be a little bit quieter for It's a Wonderful Life. So the production crew developed a new form of snow. They used a compound called foamite along with sugar and water, and they would mix it together and blow it through wind machines, and it would come down looking like snow, but it would also be, more importantly, silent. In all, they used about 6,000 gallons of this fake snow during It's a Wonderful Life, and the achievement was so significant that the Motion Picture Academy gave the process one of its scientific and technical awards for the year. In the original scripted version, the scene where the customers are coming to the bank asking to withdraw their cash, the character played by Ellen Corby was supposed to ask for $17. That's how they rehearsed it. That's what Jimmy Stewart was expecting. But before they actually got to the shot, Frank Capra pulled Ellen Corby aside and said, let's ask for $17.50 instead of 17. It'll sound more authentic and it'll be funnier. He didn't tell Jimmy Stewart though. So when they shot the scene, Jimmy Stewart was expecting 17, she says $17.50. He's caught off guard. Impulsively, he kissed her. That was the scene, that was the shot that Capra decided to keep in the film. Adjusted for inflation, the salary that Mr. Potter offers George Bailey, $20,000 a year, would be worth about $270,000 today. Mr. Potter, his bodyguard, and his driver all dress alike throughout the movie. As Saturday Night Live brilliantly pointed out years ago, Mr. Potter actually kept the $8,000 that Uncle Billy lost at the bank. Now that means that the criminal got the profit from the crime. Now this is unusual because in the 40s, the major motion picture studios were under what's called the Hays Code. And the Hays Code was a series of rules and regulations that they all agreed to abide by to maintain standards and moral decency in their films. And one of the rules was that the criminal can't profit from the crime. The only way a criminal can resolve the story is if they repent or if they're caught. And Mr. Potter did not repent, and he was not caught. Sheldon Leonard, who played Nick the bartender in It's a Wonderful Life, once said that the only reason he took this role was so that he'd have some extra cash to go to baseball games. Now that's a good enough fact there, but I wanted to include this because I'm a big fan of Sheldon Leonard. And if you're a fan of The Big Bang Theory, his name may be familiar to you as well. Chuck Lorre, who created The Big Bang Theory, named the two main characters on that show after this guy. This is Sheldon Leonard, and this is Sheldon and Leonard. Even though it's set at Christmas time, It's a Wonderful Life was shot between April 15th and July 27th, 1946. And during that period, Los Angeles was going through a summer heat wave. In fact, in some scenes, particularly the scene with George and Clarence on the bridge, you can see sweat on George Bailey's face. Now, it got so hot on some days that Frank Capra actually gave the crew a day off to recuperate from the heat. Jimmy Stewart was so overcome with emotion in the scene at the bar where he prays that he actually began to sob. Now Frank Capra wanted to capture that in the film, but all he had was a medium shot. He wanted to get a close-up. So when he was in post-production, they zoomed in on that. They blew up that piece of the print, which is why that one shot looks grainier than all the other shots in the movie. Henry Travers plays Clarence, the angel second class. He also appeared in The Bells of St. Mary's. And at the end of the movie, you'll see George Bailey running down Main Street of Bedford Falls, and he passes a movie theater showing Henry Travers' other movie, The Bells of St. Mary's. George Bailey's daughter has a nickname of Zuzu, and I always wondered where that name came from. It turns out that Zuzu was a brand of ginger snap cookies made by was now Nabisco from 1901 until the early 80s. And in fact, you can hear George call Zuzu his little ginger snap during the movie.
Zuzu, my little ginger snap, how do you feel?
The ending to It's a Wonderful Life went through a couple of iterations. In the original version, it has George falling to his knees and saying the Lord's Prayer. Now, this overly religious ending didn't play well and didn't have the emotional impact that Frank Capra was looking for. So he rewrote the scene to have George be surrounded by his friends and family at the end for a much more emotional climax. Another change to the final scene was the song that would be played at the end. Originally, it was going to be Beethoven's Ode to Joy, but they decided to change it to Auld Lang Syne instead. The scene on the poster of George holding Mary up in the air, it never happens in the movie. In all, the story in It's a Wonderful Life spans 26 years, from 1919 to 1945. If you're keeping count, we hear bells ring 42 times during It's a Wonderful Life. That means every time you watch It's a Wonderful Life, 42 angels get their wings. Frank Capra estimated that the production of It's a Wonderful Life would take 90 days to shoot. And they actually hit it exactly on 90 days. And when that prediction came true, the cast and crew threw everybody a huge party. It's a Wonderful Life was not a box office success. In fact, Frank Capra lost about $500,000 making the movie. To put that in some perspective, there have been about 6,000 movies that have done better at the box office than It's a Wonderful Life did. About 78 Christmas movies have done better than It's a Wonderful Life did at the box office. Part of the reason why It's a Wonderful Life may not have done as well at the box office was because it was released just 1 week after The Best Years of Our Lives was released. Both movies have similar themes, and both had Oscar-worthy performances. A big reason for It's a Wonderful Life becoming a Christmas tradition for so many people is likely due to a clerical error. Turns out that the rights to the film were not renewed when they should have been, so in 1974, the rights actually went to the public domain. Now, it took a lot of legal finagling, but in 1994, because the production company still owned the rights to the original story and to the film's score, they were able to reestablish the rights. But in those intervening 20 years, TV stations across America were able to show It's a Wonderful Life without paying a royalty, and many of them showed it multiple times between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Now that the rights have been resecured, only NBC shows it, and they show it twice between Thanksgiving and Christmas every year. The film was actually edited for television in the 50s and 60s. Then there's a scene where George Bailey's on the phone with Zuzu's teacher saying, "What do you mean sending her home half naked like that?" That part was edited, and the line that was dubbed in said, "What do you mean sending her home in the rain like that?" It's a Wonderful Life was the only film that Frank Capra produced, financed, directed, and co-wrote. He often said it was his favorite of all of his movies. While Jimmy Stewart often said that Harvey was the favorite of all of his movies, he also said that George Bailey was the favorite character he ever got to play. In 1977, they remade It's a Wonderful Life as a TV movie called It Happened One Christmas. The lead role was played by Marlo Thomas. She played a character named Mary Bailey Hatch, and Mr. Potter was played by Orson Welles. In 2004, the BBC conducted a poll asking for the best movie never to have won an Oscar. It's a Wonderful Life came in second, only behind The Shawshank Redemption. And finally, a little recognition. The American Film Institute has ranked It's a Wonderful Life as their #1 movie on their list of the most inspirational films of all time. It's hard to argue with that one. And as we close, remember, no man is a failure who has friends. Thanks for the wings. And with that, I want to thank you for watching another episode of A Million Movies. If you have a favorite Christmas movie, please put it down in the comments below. Maybe you'll see it in a future episode here on this channel. And until then, I look forward to seeing you again next time here on A Million Movies.